In some of my earlier videos, I talked in great detail about the four types of characters that you will most likely have in your novel. The protagonist, the main character, most important. The secondary characters, which are the rest of the characters you will put in your novel. But under the heading of secondary characters, they are categorized into more concise headings. The main secondary character, otherwise known as your antagonist, which is the second most important character in your story, and the minor characters, which, although important, are seen as the least important characters in your story. But today, I'm not going to talk about their place in your story. I'm going to talk about their positional power in your story. I know that doesn't seem to make much sense at the moment, but like I mentioned in previous videos, I did a breakdown of each kind of character and discussed their necessary place in your novel. Time for another of my little tales.
Why did you let him kill me?
A middle-aged man by the name of Harris travels to a secluded town after hearing the rumors of a sack of gold sitting on a shelf inside a house that borders a very old forest. The doors to the house are not locked, and anyone brave enough to enter the house and retrieve the sack of gold is more than welcome to it. Harris had recently lost his job and was in dire need of money, but couldn't believe that there could be a sack of gold sitting on a shelf in an unlocked house that hadn't already been claimed by someone already. Not entirely believing the rumors to be real, he traveled to the secluded town in hopes of acquiring the gold. When he arrived, he was spotted by an old man who asked if he were there to try his luck for the gold. I am, replied Harris, but I find it hard to believe that there could be a sack of gold in an unlocked house just waiting for someone to come along and take it. There is a catch, said the old man. Rumor has it, for the last 200 years there has lived inside that house an extremely dangerous spirit that has always killed anyone who has tried to leave the house with the gold. Harris began laughing. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits. It's just someone's way of keeping intruders out of the house. I believe that it's completely true, said the old man. Everyone in this town has grown up hearing about the evil spirit that lives in that house. That's why no one will dare step foot inside it, no matter how much gold might be waiting for them. But if you want to know for sure, you need to go to the old woman who lives at the top of the hill. She is the richest person in town. She is also unable to lie and will answer any question you can afford to ask her. Harris headed for the old woman's house and found it to be the most exquisite house he had seen in the town. But it was a young woman who answered the door. I am looking for the old woman who is supposed to live here, he asked. That would be my grandmother, who recently passed away, answered the young woman. And what of your mother? Asked Harris. My mother left soon after my grandmother's passing to discover life beyond this town, answered the young woman. I am now the one to answer all of your questions truthfully, but each answer will cost you 1 gold coin. Harris decided to pay one of the 3 gold coins he had, figuring he would end up with a sack of them if the young woman agreed that there was gold in the house. Okay, he began. Is there really a sack of gold in that house just sitting on a shelf? The young woman took his gold coin and answered, yes, an entire sack of gold that has remained untouched for 200 years. Harris began smiling and was just about to head down the hill to the house when he realized he needed to ask another question. Are the rumors true of there being an evil spirit that has scared all of the people in this town from entering the house? He asked. The young woman took possession of another of his gold coins and answered, yes, the spirit has killed over 40 different people trying to obtain the sack of gold that remains on the shelf. Harris Believing the words of the young woman, thought for a moment and then decided to keep his last gold coin and go back home and forget all about the sack of gold. As he made his way down the hill, the young woman stood in her doorway and laughed at him as he headed home. Today, I'll talk about your character's important position in your story, and then I'll tell you what had the young woman laughing so hard. You already know that your character's order of importance is your protagonist, your antagonist, and then the rest of your secondary characters and your minor characters. Seems straightforward enough, but it isn't. I have in the past discussed the importance of creating the best characters you can. They need to be memorable and someone your reader can relate to. Since many new writers fail at creating strong characters, and since your characters are what drives your story is left seeming uninteresting with no real direction. Subsequently, your reader loses interest. But that doesn't mean that writing a very strong and believable character that is both memorable and relatable is always a good thing. In fact, sometimes it can cause confusion and have your reader wondering what's going on. I may have confused you further, so I'll simplify it a little. I talked about their positional power in your story. Your characters should always be placed in position of most to least importance. Your protagonist is always placed in the first position and has the most power. Your antagonist is always placed in the second position and has the second most power. The other secondary characters are the next most powerful, and all the minor characters follow them with the least amount of power. And this is where the problem occurs. New writers try so hard to create strong and believable characters, they forget about their characters' position of power in their story. Sometimes, even though they try to create the greatest protagonist they can, they end up with an antagonist that is actually more powerful. One of the best examples of this is in the novel Frankenstein. Here, the antagonist, the monster, is so compelling and relatable that he outshines the protagonist, Dr. Frankenstein. In this novel, the writer has done an amazing job at making one of the most memorable characters in fiction. The problem is, she made him too amazing. This secondary character overshadowed the main character, which is a no no, and the result is an unbalanced story. This is probably the reason why people tend to believe that the monster is Frankenstein, the protagonist, when in truth, the monster is really the antagonist who was never actually given a name. A writer striving to create the greatest character possible isn't a bad thing. On the contrary, it's a good thing. The problem is, no matter how amazing, memorable, and relatable you make your secondary characters, just make sure that your protagonist is more amazing, memorable, and relatable. If your antagonist's position of power is greater than your protagonist, then your protagonist will be overshadowed by your antagonist, which will result in your protagonist seeming weak and less important. Your reader will gravitate to your antagonist, like in Frankenstein, and your story will not deliver the effect you intended for it. You will need to re examine your protagonist, and if you discover that you cannot make his position of power stronger than your antagonist, then your protagonist isn't strong enough, and serious reconstructing is inevitable. You might even need to eliminate your protagonist altogether and create a more powerful one. Imagine if Lex Luthor The antagonist's position of power was greater than Superman's, the protagonist. Superman would undoubtedly lose in the end. The same holds true if you give any of your other secondary characters a greater position of power than your antagonist. Remember, the only character more powerful than your antagonist is your protagonist. If you find that you have created any of your secondary characters with a position of power greater than your antagonist, then, like your weak protagonist, your antagonist will be overshadowed and not the opponent he needs to be to offer a suitable opposition for your protagonist. Remember, the antagonist's role in your story is to be confrontational, helping your protagonist to overcome all of the adversities the antagonist puts him through. If your antagonist is too weak to accomplish this task, then your protagonist cannot overcome his tribulations and your story suffers. If one of your secondary characters has a position of power greater than your antagonist, you have a choice to make. Find a way to give your antagonist a better position of power, or demote that character and make that more powerful secondary character your antagonist. As I have talked about before, your minor characters are like fillers. They just arrive momentarily with one objective, and that is to help your main character move the story along. Say whatever you will about them, they have no other purpose. If they did more, they wouldn't be considered minor characters. If your main character is on a quest to find hidden treasure, a minor character might pop up to provide him with a clue. If your main character happens to be walking down the street and bumps into someone who accidentally spills a coffee on them, causing them to seek a place to clean up, and in return, he discovers that had he not gone into that place, he wouldn't have discovered something that helps move the story forward. That person he bumps into would be a minor character. Chances are that character would never be seen or heard of again because they had done one job and that job has now been concluded. But if you find that one of your minor characters has more than just the least amount of position of power, you might have simply changed their role from a minor character and upgraded them to a secondary character. This is not a problem. There are many instances where this happens. For example, if that minor character who bumps into your main character then takes him back to her place to get cleaned up and subsequently a love affair initiates, then she is no longer a minor character. She has become a love interest and is now a secondary character. This is because now, as a love interest, it is obvious that we will see her again, and she is now in a position to continually affect the outcome of your story. But it doesn't stop there. What if her bumping into your main character wasn't an accident? What if she had planned it all along and throughout the remainder of your story, she continually tries to thwart all of his plans to reach his intended goal? And if you find that she is doing it better than your current antagonist, she needs to be upgraded again to your new antagonist. In the end, it is imperative to follow the structure of each character's position of power. Make your characters as strong and as believable as possible. Just make sure that they keep their intended place in your novel so you will have a greater chance for a well defined body of characters. And now I'll tell you the ending of the story I call The Inherited Rumor. The young woman was telling the truth. There actually was a sack of gold sitting on the shelf in the unlocked house, just waiting for someone to walk inside and take it. She knew it, and because, like her mother and her mother before her, she couldn't tell a lie. She told everyone who asked her about it. But the reason she was laughing at Harris was because of his questions. If he had asked her the right question, she would have truthfully told him that although there used to be an evil spirit who had killed anyone attempting to take the gold, that evil spirit had moved away over 100 years ago and left its gold for anyone who wanted it. And the reason that she didn't merely go into the house and take the sack of gold knowing that there was no longer a threat was because since her grandmother was a little girl, she had been collecting gold coins from all who needed their questions answered, which had amounted to more than what the sack held. Her mother took over for a while, but grew tired of such a simple life, and after taking a generous amount of gold with her, moved away. And since the young woman could never lie, if she removed the sack of gold from the house, she would have to admit that there was no longer any gold left in the house. People would stop coming to her for answers, and she would no longer be able to continue charging each of them a gold coin for an answer to their question. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful